So again, welcome. This is our Treasury 101 presentation. I'll start by just acknowledging that we are doing this work on the unceded shared traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. Much of what Treasury work is about kind of right use of resources, and that's a whole wider topic about which we all have much to learn from our local First Nations neighbors. So you may find this is a fairly content-heavy set of slides. Don't worry if some of it seems to just kind of be a little much, because you can always access it through the website and take a look and pull out the information that you need. We've kind of slowly adapted it over the years as questions have come up. Those questions have consistently come up. We've tried to actually put something about them into the slides. And one of the things, being the DPAC treasurer is actually very different from being a PAC treasurer, because for the most part, the DPACs in general don't do any fundraising. So the amount of money we're handling is a little different, and the organization of the funds is a little bit different. Having said that, probably the most interesting and challenging part of the work is being in effect becoming kind of a go-to person for people who have questions about how the Treasury stuff works. So that's been a very cool part of the experience over the last few years. Because DPAC has the formal stakeholder relationship with the Vancouver School Board, it's pretty straightforward for us to go to VSB Finance and ask for clarification of a policy and stuff like that. So if you find you're working with something where you're getting sort of communications back from your principal about how things are managed that don't make a lot of sense to you, and you want to kind of check out how if that take on VSB policy is the take, or if there's a misunderstanding there somewhere, then that's one good way DPAC can be used as a resource to kind of send us your question, and we can go and sort of ask the source and then get back to you with sort of hopefully some clarification. Sometimes it's confirming the answer you didn't want to hear, but sometimes it's actually discovering that there's more room to try and do something, and a few more options than maybe a new administrator might know about. So please do call upon DPAC if you have stuff that we can help out with along those lines. So part of the DPAC's general kind of function of helping PACs be more effective and in their own work as well. So I'm going to start screen sharing now and go to the slide deck. So and that's interesting. Oh dear, I'm not seeing the thing that I want to share. So let me just try that again. Here we go. Yay. So without further ado, can you all see that? I'm going to switch it to presentation mode there if I can.
Top right says slideshow. There's a button.
Oh, there you go. And you know why? Yeah, thank you very much. It's obscured by that little box that shows me some of the pictures of people here in some of the boxes. There we go. Thank you very much. All right. So here we go. I will open. Yep. All right, so to start off, for start at the beginning, kind of what is the role of the treasurer, right? I abstracted some of this material comes from BC PAC's leadership manual, which has a very good chapter on PAC financial management, which is linked to on the resources page, and worth taking a look at. So treasurer is basically responsible for sort of safe custody of the council's money. The treasurer is not someone who has in and of themselves authority over spending any more than any other executive member will because those decisions are group decisions made by the PAC at general meetings or executive meetings, depending on what kind of decision and what your bylaws say about it. But the treasurer is the person who's kind of tasked with sort of managing all of that stuff. So roles include, ensuring you've got all the banking and financial records kept in good order, and able to sort of pass on to somebody else, and have them make sense and be look atable by anyone else in the PAC who wants to see what's going on. That's if you're doing a lot of stuff by e-transfer, that's just a good thing is just keep some kind of a copy, either digital or hard copy of all the authorizations for e-transfers and such accounts. So keeping everything recorded on a ledger or a spreadsheet. Some people use accounting software. Other people find that a spreadsheet is a simpler way of just recording what goes on with the PAC. Bank reconciliations when you need to. Regular financial reports. The best practice is at any PAC meeting, the treasurer would give a report up to the end of the month previous about where things are at in terms of income and expenses. A year-end report for the annual general meeting. Drafting an annual budget, again, with the assistance of other executive members. That's not something that needs to be the treasurer just going off and doing that by themselves. So yeah, and the last piece there, money can only be spent according to the council's approved budget or with authority from a motion passed at a general meeting. So as treasurer, you're responsible for making sure that that authority is not exceeded. So if you're asked to write a check and there's no that's either not covered by an already passed budget or there's no specific motion, just to remind people that for transparency and good process that does need to happen. So fundraising is not formally part of a treasurer's role. So if as treasurer, you'll be quite involved in fundraising activities in terms of tracking what comes in and doing the banking and being the person who puts together the payments for folks, invoices and such. But it's not a lot of primary and secondary school PACs do fundraise, and a lot of people will have, many of your PACs may have this separate position as a fundraising coordinator. So usually the treasurer will work fairly closely with that person, but it's not treasurer's responsibility per se to do the fundraising. There are some parent communities that refuse to fundraise on principle. Some of you folks may be from PACs who basically don't do any additional fundraising. That what you've got is your gaming grant, and then you're sort of budgeting based on that. So and that's entirely appropriate, really. If you look at it's more of a PAC 101 thing, but if you look at the definitions of and purposes of PACs under the School Act, which is created both PACs and DPAC segregations of the School Act. Fundraising is not a part of it. We're really there as an advisory body to the either to the school administration or to the district. PACs could do both. DPAC's focused on the district and focused around kind of community building and finding ways to kind of enhance the experience of our students. So fundraising can be a part of that, but it doesn't have to be. So the issue comes up quite frequently. PACs are asked to fundraise for things, and some communities have more of a capacity to do that than others. So you end up with inequities throughout the system in terms of the ability of the schools to provide kind of up-to-date technology is often a big one. There is a mechanism which was set up a few years ago called PAC to PAC, not to be confused with the PAC to PAC Slack group, which many of you may be on, for just consultation among PACs around brainstorming around various issues and such. But PAC to PAC, this PAC to PAC is a system set up with VSB Finance where if a PAC decides it wants to is well resourced and the community decides they want to share some of those resources with a PAC that's less resourced, then that's a whole system whereby funds can be transferred between PACs through the VSB. And our chair, Vic Hanna, is the person to ask if you have questions about how that works. That program has always kind of sat with the chair ever since it was put in place about 3 or 4 years ago. One of the things that PACs have found over the years is that it takes so much energy on the part of the fundraising people and then that group of volunteers to do a lot of small fundraising events throughout the years, the kind of the merchandise-based things like, a poinsettia sale around this time of year, or, running the, well, hot lunch programs are a kind of different animal, but the kind of the small fundraisers that happen, that some PACs will prefer to just ask people for a donation up front at the beginning of the year, and then they see kind of how much money has come in, and it helps them set their budget. So that's the direct appeal piece. So we'll talk about that for a moment, because that's changed. For those of you who are new to PACs, this will be the system that you've known. About 3 years ago, PACs used to collect donations themselves and then make up a big list of donors and how much they donated and send that into the VSB, who would then take that money into their account, write out the charitable donation receipts for it, and then send the money back to the PACs for the PACs accounts. The perception at some point in the VSB was this actually was problematic for the VSB's maintaining its status as a registered charitable organization, because if you are a charitable organization that has issued a receipt for donation, you have to be the organization that maintains control over how that donation was spent. So the system was kind of revamped now. So all PACs now have a VSB held account that people can donate to through School Cash Online. Rather than writing a check to the PAC, you can go online. You could write a check to the VSB and earmark it for the PAC, or they could go online through School Cash Online, which you all probably know from having paid school fees. But there's a donations mode in School Cash Online, which you don't need to have a student in the VSB to be able to access. And you can, through that, go through their menus and pick a link for that says the destination of the donation is for your particular PAC. And so a lot of so that way then the school holds all the school issues, the VSB issues the charitable receipts pretty much right away, and then they hold the money essentially in trust for the PAC, and then the PAC is able to then say to their school administrator, right, this is how we want to spend this money, and then the school administration arranges for the payments to happen. So so where that leaves PACs though is they can't use those funds for completely anything. So the funds that come in through the direct donation campaign need to be broadly consistent with the charitable purposes of the VSB. So essentially that means they're dedicated towards the benefit of students and parents. So for example, if you're running a parent education session and there's a speaker who has a speaker fee, you can pay for that out of the VSB held account. If you're organizing a teacher appreciation event, which involves maybe purchasing some food, that also, or some catering costs, that also is a legitimate expense. Things like PAC operating expenses, your BCC PAC membership, if you're a member of BCC PAC, any stationery, any bank charges, all that kind of stuff can't be paid out of that. So you have to use your non-receivable fundraising proceeds to pay for that, and then sometimes a little tricky to work out what's what, but so it's always good to have a pretty solid administration with your school administrator and your school accountant to be able to sort of talk through, okay, is this an expense we can take from the VSB account, or do we need to use our money from the other kinds of fundraising we've done that don't have receipts for them. So that sort of takes us into well, maybe I'll stop there and just see if there are any questions that have come up kind of about this piece. Scott, do you see anything there?
I know there's some other pending questions, but I think that maybe come a little bit later in terms of the details around how to sort out multiple years of expenses that are kind of accumulated. But yeah, that's.
Oh, okay, yeah, we can put that in the parking lot for. And I see Elise has her hand up. Elise, please go ahead.
So I guess you mentioned the spreadsheet where, like, for instance, if parents are donating by check to the PAC and or cash, we used to write that into this Excel sheet that the VSB used to give us, and like names, how much, and give them the sheet, and then along with the check representing the total number of money that was donated. And then they provide the receipts. Do they still do that? Is that still the process? If some of these parents don't really, somehow for whatever reason, they're just easier to just write a check or just give us cash in an envelope.
Right. So, so the short answer is no. That's no longer the process. The VSB has moved away from that. And if the parents give money, it's fine for the parents to write a check to the PAC or to give money directly to the PAC, but they can't receive a tax receipt for that. So it depends on how important it is for the parent to receive that. If they want to give you the money and say, I do need a receipt, then you do have to tell them, no, you actually then need to donate that either as a check to the VSB, earmarked to the PAC, or to go through School Cash Online and use the link that identifies the donation as going to the PAC. So you might have to help them out with that if the receipt's important to them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. David, did you have a thought?
You mostly covered it. I just wanted to make sure that there was the distinction where the change for donations and direct donations to PACs only is relevant if a receipt is needed. If you can deliver, if PACs want to collect money and get direct donations via PayPal, via check, via cash directly to them, they just don't have to give a receipt, and that's fine. If you write a check to the school or the VSB directly and then say for PAC, then would also go into the school's account. So and could get a receipt. So those are the subtle distinctions there.
Right, thank you. And apologizing for my telephone going off in the background there. Yeah, yeah, thank you, David. No, it's the needing a receipt or not that does make the difference for sure. Click on next one. Yeah, so in terms of setting up those direct donations, the menu on School Cash Online is large and clunky, and that people can on occasion, especially the first year this came up, this seemed to be a problem where people made donations to the school and thought they were donating to the PAC, and then it had to kind of be sorted out when schools kind of had, oh, we have more money than we thought. And PACs were like, well, we didn't get nearly the donations that we thought we were going to get this year. So there are, what the menu takes you to is a link to your particular school. DPAC does have the list of those links. So if you are setting up a donation, direct donation campaign, and you would like to, in your instructions, the parents just simply put that link instead of instructing them to go through the menus, please let me know, because I can provide that to you. Yeah, otherwise you need to provide particularly clear instructions if you're using the drop-down menus, just to make sure that someone doesn't inadvertently send a donation they want to go to you somewhere else. So the other thing that happens through School Cash Online is that you don't know right away what's happened with it, because that is a VSB account. So it's if you're setting up a direct donation, it's good to ask parents to consider also advising the PAC that they have made a donation, so that the PAC can send them a thank you, acknowledge their gift, if they would like that too. When you are running a direct donation campaign, so typically the school accountant will receive information from VSB Finance kind of once a month as to what's come in. If you're running a campaign where you're doing something like you've got a thermometer, you want to be able to say, you know, on a weekly basis how much money has come in to encourage people to participate, then that can happen, but it needs to be set up beforehand. So when you're thinking of doing a direct donation campaign, please talk to your school admin and say, we would like to have updates more frequently of what's come into School Cash Online, so that we can use them as part of our campaign. And that's always possible to arrange. It just needs it's just better if you do it first, so that everything can be kind of planned up, and it's not a sudden ask at the last minute, because that's often just harder to fulfill, right? You can also run non-receivable fundraisers say, for example, you're selling tickets to an event, or having a merchandise sale. That can also be done through School Cash Online, but not through the donation section, through the school fees section. So again, if you want to do something where, instead of asking people to use PayPal or any of those other sort of payment processor programs, which can be tricky for PACs. I've heard a lot of different experiences about them. We've had some with DPAC ourselves, where because we're not registered societies, we're not we're not charitable organizations in and of ourselves. We're not really we're kind of an odd duck that doesn't really fit very easily into some of the administrative structures that those places have. So plus, if you do use an account like that, it's really important to have a couple of your executive members have access to it, and the email to be a general PAC email, not a personal email, because they can be really strangely complicated to change when people move on and off your executive. So a simpler way to do that is to use School Cash Online, and then to set that up with the office, and then parents have an option to respond to the fundraiser electronically as well, and doesn't leave you with piles of TNEs to roll and bank deposits to do as well. So what happens at that point is, once the money has come in, the VSB then transfers money to the PAC's general account, either by writing them a check or by an electronic funds transfer. So the VSB doesn't hold on to the money. It comes in through School Cash Online, but it's kind of got in a box for that particular fundraising project, and then the VSB transfers the money back to the PAC. So that brings us to the question of, so you've got your school held account, which you don't see what's going into, and you work with the principal to get money out of, but you also need two other bank accounts for PAC. One is for your gaming funds. We'll talk about that more later. One is for your non-restricted funds, or whatever you've raised from non-receivable fundraising. Again, if you've accepted donations that people say we don't need a receipt, I would go into that, or any of your other fundraising projects. That money would either go into that directly or be transferred back from VSB if you use School Cash Online. So gaming also doesn't allow PACs to spend money on their operating expenses out of gaming. So you do need that third account, just a general PAC account, to be able to handle your general operating expenses. Good, this is to name the accounts clearly. Your PAC held account, your gaming account, you'll probably have checks for. It's always good to have two signatures for checks and two authorizations for any e-transfer. It's good to make sure that you have at least 3 signing officers, so that if you have to have 2 officers on a transaction, but one of the person making an expense claim or something is one of the signing officers, then the other 2 signing officers would sign off on that check. So just keeping things clean. One sort of never writes a check to oneself, or is a co-signer on a check to oneself. So PAC officers are normally signatories of the bank. That's typically chair or co-chair, vice chair, treasurer, secretary, if they're co-secretaries or co-treasurers. The way DPAC's structured, we're pretty simple. We have a chair, a vice chair, secretary, and treasurer are 4 officers. All 4 of us have signing authority. So there's 4 of us to be able to manage that stuff. Alec.
Sorry, double muted. So on the signing authority, for example, we have 2 executives that are in the same family. So would it be a problem if one of those executives had an expense and one of the co-signers was the other member of the family? Is that also a conflict?
That's a good question. I've never heard that one raised before. My sense of it probably is you'd be okay, because there'd be 2 signers. So, the family member would be a signer, but right. Somebody else would be a signer as well, right? Right. If you felt that just didn't feel quite right, then you could always try and set up, so you have 4 signers, and so the other 2 signers could run with that. But my sense is you've got some Yeah, I mean, it's actually somewhat challenging sometimes in an organization like PAC for everybody to be kind of at arm's length from each other in a conventional way. So you know, my sense is, and maybe I'll check this and get back. It's one of the, it's usually a few things to check it back, get back to people on about this. I might check in on that, but in case I'm being a little lax, but my sense of it is you're probably fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I know that you did mention e-transfers that have dual authorizations. I've never heard of that before. Our credit line won't allow us to do that. So I'm wondering if there is a workaround, because certainly in terms of a paper trail, a digital paper trail would make our lives a lot easier if people could see, you know, submit a receipt and then an email goes out. But our credit line has told us, our credit, not credit line, sorry. The bank, the credit union, sorry, has told us it's a hard no, because we need 2 signers on a check. We're not allowed to do it. So I'm wondering if there's workarounds to that.
Okay, so sorry, if I understand correctly, because you need 2 signers on check, you can't do e-transfers.
That's right.
Okay. That's interesting. I haven't heard of an institution saying that before. DPAC works with a credit union in town. We work with Van City, and we were easily able to. We'd never done it before this year, but we were easily able to set up 2 signer e-transfers. It was apparently a dormant feature on the account that we hadn't actually realized we had. So it was actually very easy to set it up. So I don't know if it's worth asking your financial institution if there's another kind of account that you could have that would be more appropriate. I know our account is a community service account. Which is it's a subset of a business account rather than a personal account. So it maybe there's a different kind of account, or you might, if you think this is going to be a significant burden on you guys not to be able to do that in the future, then you might want to consider if you want to change to another financial institution.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see in the chat people are suggesting Van City. Ours is GNF Financial, and it is a credit union. And yeah, we hit this issue last year, but now that I'm more involved in the financial side of our exec, it would be very, very nice to have that. So we'll look into that. Thank you very much for the answer to the question.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, is there anybody else who's done this or had experience with this? And but if people are answering in the chat, which I can't see, great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's super. Yeah. No, the DPAC is with Van City as well, and because this year we've taken somewhat a new departure in running this extracurricular choral program, which involves us taking collecting parent fees and then paying the conductors and the pianists and stuff. It's been really, really good to be able to do all that electronically and not have to, be running around physically with checks for people and stuff. So yeah, no, I get how complicated things could be if your PAC is doing a lot of fundraising and to not be able to do stuff electronically. Yeah. I think that's it. So I actually there's a little note on the bottom of there that talks about an infographic of how money flows through bank accounts. The link there is on the further resources slide, and it's also posted on site. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the gaming account, to give you sort of complete the picture of the sort of 3 PAC accounts, and then we can talk about the infographic, and then maybe we'll take a little bit of a break for a few minutes. So gaming grants. So that's the other account that you need to have. All British Columbia PACs can apply for gaming grants from the provincial government. The application period is April 1st to June 30th every year. And within 90 days of the PAC's fiscal year end, you have to submit a report on how you spent the money for the prior year to gaming. We've certainly run across PACs where that had been forgotten about for a few years, and then eventually you get a note from gaming saying, we're not going to give you any more money until you give us all the information from the past years, which then can be complicated if there's been a lot of turnover in the executive. So it's an important piece to kind of keep on top of. Funds are generally dispersed by October 31st. I think they came in about the 15th of October this year. And for many years, this has continued the same. They fund at $20 per student, and the total grant amount is based on your student enrollment at the start of the previous school year. So for example, when you are applying in the spring for your gaming grant for next year, the number you will get from the school for the students, the number enrolled, will be the number as of the end of the September that's just passed. So if your enrollment's going up and down a bit, it won't quite match, but it's still $20 per student. So it can be a fairly substantial amount of money for some of the bigger schools, some of the high schools, particularly, the gaming grants are on the order of about $30,000 just because they've got 1,500 students, kind of thing. PACs control and approve and control how all that money is spent. And then when you do that report to gaming, you're giving a detailed breakdown of how you spent the money. And that's when they will check and see, did you spend it according to eligible uses or not, right? The link on the bottom of that page is the sort of overall guideline to gaming grants for PACs for the year. So the thing with gaming grants is they do not approve funding, or they don't wish the grant money to be spent on stuff that you're going to spend. The expenses have to be for things that you have receipts for that you can then reimburse. So for example, PACs sometimes like to set a budget for each division each year and say, we can fund the teacher to this amount of sort of extra materials for sort of enhancing the student expenses or extracurricular activities. So you can't just write the teacher a check for that amount from gaming and then have them submit their receipts for the year. You really have to, if you want to take that approach, basically the way to do it is to say to the teachers, we have this much money and we'll reimburse you once you spend bits of it up to this much money. And then the paper trail will be what's required. You need to use those grant funds within 36 months of receipts. You actually have 3 years to spend the money that comes in each year. So it's possible to carry forward money from past years if you're saving money for, say, a larger expense, such as some IT equipment or some let's not go to IT equipment actually, because that's generally curricular rather than extracurricular. But if you're, say, one of the PACs who's working on not waiting for the provincial program, but wanting to do some playground equipment replacement, that can be quite expensive, and maybe you would need a few years of gaming grant money to be able to really make a good chunk in that. So you can carry it forward for 3 years. You can't use gaming grants to pay for other fundraising. So this came up last year. Someone said, well, what about yearbooks? Because yearbooks are fundraising. I talked to gaming. I said, yeah, well, if the money that the gaming grant is paying to support the yearbook production is supporting the production, so that the cost of the yearbook is actually less, so it's more affordable for people, then that's okay. More common example are things like if you're holding a fundraiser at say the school sports day is going on and you've got a table where you're selling refreshments. If you're selling the refreshments at a profit to raise funds, then you can't buy the refreshments using gaming money. But if you're selling them at cost, then you can. Right, so it's basically there's a few gray areas there, but if you're the general principle is if you're working an event on a cost recovery basis, then it's okay to use gaming money to pay for the supplies or the bouncy castle or whatever you're bringing in. But if it's actually a fundraiser, then you need to fund those out of your own PAC account, or it's possible that you could fund them out of the VSB account too. It's basically for student benefit. So here is the excerpt from the gaming grant guidelines about what you can and can't use gaming money for. So basically, clubs, extracurricular activities, those are the sort of the key pieces of what gaming funds are okay for. Last year, for the first time, gaming said you can use your gaming money to pay for your BCC PAC membership fee, which is $75 a year if you want to be a member of BCC PAC. I know at KITS we've frequently actually so traditionally use some of our gaming money for scholarships and bursaries for post-secondary education. The PAC has given out a couple of scholarships every year. This year is the last year that that's an eligible expense for gaming. I don't know why that changes, but that's the change that's coming up. So if your PAC has done this for particularly high school PACs have done this, then next year you'll need to rethink, or this year you'll need to rethink how you're going to fund that next year. This year is still okay. Basically, you can see through the eligible examples, there's quite a consistent theme to it. So anything curricular, teacher or classroom resources, such as computers and information technology, any capital improvements, things that are the responsibility of the school district, whether or not the school district is really fulfilling that responsibility in a good way or not. Parents are not allowed to use gaming money to jump in and say pay for improvement to a ventilation system in the school, for example. That's a no-go from the gaming funds. Any debts, so when it talks about things like lighting, curtains, props for in-school theater classes, it would be okay though to buy equipment for a theater club. So there's often kind of a gray area where teachers will make requests, but particularly in high schools, for equipment that is for a club or a team, but you kind of figure it's going to be used in classes as well. And gaming also recognizes that there are kind of gray areas about this stuff here. And the key piece is what's the intended use of that stuff? And does that fit in with the gaming eligibility criteria? I've actually found it, I've heard people say, don't call gaming an SM, but I've actually found them quite helpful to talk through that stuff with. And better, I think, if you've got a request that you're thinking about funding that you're not sure about, whether you can use gaming or not, it's, I think, better to talk to them and say, here's what it is, what do you think? Because that's way better than having them come back to you with after you've submitted your report saying, oh, you shouldn't have spent that. That's a no-go. Yeah. So I think it's actually okay to use them as a resource. They don't like gaming does not like you to do anything that's not for the benefit of students. So for example, if you do a parent education workshop, that could be funded out of your VSB funds, but not your gaming funds. Can't pay for teachers on call, can't pay for staff lunches, which you can through the VSB money, or again, your operational costs. So it's it looks like a fairly daunting list, but it's worth picking up the manual, downloading the manual from gaming, and spending some time with that just to help you sort of sort through those decisions. There is on our PAC resource page, or resource for PAC treasurers, there is a BCC PAC presentation on Treasury on gaming grants, which actually has a bit of a decision tree that's kind of helpful to work through as well for some of that. So I'd recommend people looking at that if they're grappling with this stuff as well. So the gaming money needs to be held in its own account. It's got to be called the gaming grant account. It's got to have your full name on it, and it can only hold gaming funds, and you can't put any other money in there. So that's why you need that separate account. Needs a separate checking checks. You can do e-transfers out of them as long as, again, you keep the records of the authorizations of the expenditures. So in your records need to be able to just itemize everything that's spent out of it, what it's spent on, who authorized it, when it happened, and it's gaming that kind of sets the standard for how long you keep PAC records, because their requirement is 5 years. So the general rule of thumb for any PAC financial records is 5 years would be kind of the minimum of records that you should keep before you start recycling old stuff. And again, you need two signing authorities on the gaming account. You can't deal in cash for a gaming account. So it's basically all about, the province is giving you this money, so they have the level of accountability that they need people that they're giving gaming money to be able to demonstrate an appropriate use of public money, essentially. The other way people raise money through gaming is not through the grant, but through getting a gaming license to hold an event. So a bingo, a raffle, a 50-50 draw, a cakewalk, at say you have a spring fair or something at the school as a fundraiser, then you can hold those. You can hold those kind of events if you get a gambling event license. They're not complicated to get. The listing, the instructions and stuff are on the link at the bottom of the page there. Any money you raise from those events, though, can't go into your PAC account. It also needs to go into your gaming account. And when you do the gaming account report at the end of the year, there's sections that kind of break out what was through your grant and what was through any events that you held. The uses are essentially the same. The licensed charitable gaming rules have a section on PACs, which is a bit simpler, but essentially has the same intent as the gaming grant eligibility criteria. But you've only got 12 months to use those funds. So anything you basically raise in a year, it's good to spend that in a year. So the other things to think about are best practice. How to use your gaming grant is to kind of consult with your school community, parents, teachers, staff, students, administration about what they would like to see funded. I know a lot of PACs have a system along the lines of consulting with teachers particularly, and then admin will kind of look at the asks that come in and say, oh, we actually could fund that through something else, so you don't need to use gaming, or that project we're not going to do for this reason or whatever. So it's good to have something of a collaborative approach to figuring out the needs. Elise, you had a question.
Oh, hi, Alan. It seems there's been some changes to the whole gaming process, right? Like a couple of years ago, one of the teachers had said that we didn't do this a couple of years ago, but she said that gaming grant could allow for purchase of library books, and but now you're saying that's not allowed, right?
Library books is a good question.
Like for comics, like not reference books, which might be considered curriculum, but like usually comic books, like Harry Potter books for rainy day activities, like.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that wouldn't be okay.
Should I email them? Because it's a gray area, because the teachers, I think it could be used for library. So this year we're thinking about using some of it for that purpose. Like some of the books that there's some of the books that have been dog-eared and they want to just replace it, like with some of the Harry Potter books, some of the comic books that the kids like to read, but they know they can't buy reference books, which could be used for curriculum. So yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's worth a clarification. I see a few people jumped in with their hands up. So do other people have thoughts on this, Sky? Was that?
At our school, I think it's how you write it up. So I think with what we did was, I think they had a reading club and different things like that. There were, as long as it's extracurricular, as long as you're not buying a set of books for a classroom that's going to be used for curricular stuff. So it can be stuff around looking at the Holocaust, or stuff that has a particular or anti-racism. So there are certain topics that you can, that if a teacher is requesting, it's just, it can't be for an in class.
Oh, okay. So like, what about books that are like, there's a couple of books that were meant to help people with autism who like, so not any books like that, right? But just leisurely comic stuff. Like a book that was meant for somebody with, what is it? Like who has trouble learning, dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could get maybe subscriptions, I mean, that were something that were just sort of general use. I think that you'd have some leeway there. At least that's my understanding, Ellen. You can definitely clarify if you think something differently, but that's what I get.
Well, again, I think that's worth a question to gaming to clarify, but my sense is if it's not, you know, if it's kind of support resources, then I don't know if support resources for kids with special needs, that might be something that you might want to consider if you've got funds from any kind of direct donation campaign to use those instead. That would be kind of, I think, pretty unequivocal that would be okay. If it's more the academic sort of side of things. But I think yeah, no, I think it'd be worth a call to gaming to say, you know, library books, you know, we got some, you know, recreational use stuff. And Sky's thought about how you present it is good too. If the school has, if the librarian is the teacher sponsor of a reading club or something like that, then it's, you know, a club expense is completely fine, right? So,
Okay.
yeah. I made a question myself, library books to check that. Yeah, and as with anything, you know, in your general meetings, any expenditure you make out of gaming funds should be minuted, and then the minutes of the meeting, you know, kind of showing all the things minutes need to show, you know, number of people attending, what the quorum was, you know, if there's a vote taken, you know, how that went. So just to make sure that everything's really clear, you know, to anyone looking as to anyone interested as into how your money is being used. At this point, actually, then I'm gonna stop sharing this and I'm going to pull up. I'm going to start sharing again. I'm going to pull up the second. Excuse me. Just getting out of the full screen so I can find the other thing here. And whoops. Sorry, folks. Here we go. I'm gonna screen share now the right. Thank you, Sky. The focus there is to the benefit of students, right? So I'm going to now pull up the graphic that David kindly worked on through the past year, and to try and sort of pull all that information about the bank accounts together into one place. It's I didn't put it into the slide because it doesn't really fit on the screen very well. It's put out more as kind of a handout form, so you can access that now through the resources page of the PAC website. And here it is. And David, if you would like to speak a bit to the work here.
Okay, so my goal here was I wanted to understand how things worked. And therefore I decided to try and write a pile of notes, and then I ended up with this huge page of text. You can actually see it, it's on the third page of this. And I came to the conclusion that presenting anyone with a wall of text would not be very effective to either allow them to understand or to make a point or to ask a question. So I wanted to try and basically have something to have a visual mechanism to show everything that basically has been covered in the meeting to a degree or not. Now, I should say, there's a couple things in here which are kind of best practices, or what I think might be the best practices, and they could be wrong. I vetted this through Alan, I vetted this through DPAC, Alan's vetted it through someone at the VSB, so it is effectively correct, we believe. But in terms of what are the things you have to do and what are the things you should do and what are just best practices, that's a little grayer. So this is my perspective of what you should do. This is not even what my PAC does, because we don't actually have any rules. You see in the yellow line for charitable donations to the VSB account, it goes into a charitable account donation, and then I have text on the line going to it being paid, direction requested in meeting minutes. We've actually never done that. We don't have a bylaw that says you do it. We don't say anything about how one authorizes the administrator to write the check. Historically, our treasurer just asked. which is not two signatures, not a good mechanism. So I don't think our process was best practice. So I'm putting in here what is probably best practice. But again, this document I'm sort of releasing to the DPAC and DPACs as a visualization for my understanding of it. And of course, if I get feedback, my email is on the document to try and make corrections and alterations to this. But predominantly it's showing on the first page how most PACs generally operate. There's money coming in from the community and from the BC government in the Lotto Corporation for the gaming grant. That some of the money goes into the VSB accounts, some of the money goes into the individual PAC accounts or the gaming account, and it shows the separation of accounts and sometimes the different rules for how the money goes in and how the money has to go out. If you scroll up, go back up a little, the one detail on this, which I view as best practices, is that making up these two imaginary accounts inside of the VSB. And these are basically accounts inside of the VSB for your school. And I expect most schools do not actually have two separate accounts or two separate buckets for things coming in for either the charitable donations by check or school cash online, or fundraisers like selling something like a shirt or a yearbook or something else on school cash online that is a fundraising event that doesn't have a taxable receipt, therefore isn't in yellow, it's in blue. It goes into really operational items. But how you interact with your admin might be different. And one of the reasons I made this was I hear people who have talked to their administrators and they hear very different things about what the rules are and what PACs do and where accounts should be. And I wanted to have a single place where at least all PACs can understand it. And once we're all happy with this, it is also a piece of paper that you could, in theory, take to your admin and say, do we agree that this is how this actually works? Because PACs think this and DPACs thinks this, and the VSB told us this is right. So it'd be nice if the administrator also is on the same page. And hopefully this could help that as a tool to allow a conversation to happen between PACs and administration to see how it can be done, and also just shows how complicated things are. So I put this out. I have a second page. So if you want to check out the second page, there's a thing that we've only barely covered, which is PACs are not BC societies, but they can be. There are some PACs that are BC charitable societies. You then have to do a bunch of additional reporting to the federal government, to the BC government. You can then write your own tax receipts. In this case, I also have it having its own bank account. I don't know if that's actually necessary, but I just wanted that for clarity. So there are actual two ways PACs can operate. PACs can operate just under the School Act in our little gray area of where we live, or we can actually be a society. I've not experienced this, but some PACs are. And then they have different options, some different abilities, and they have different reporting requirements. And I wanted to sort of cover both of those in this document. So anyway, I'm giving that out. I expect I'll get some feedback overall and some questions about this. And hopefully we can make it more accurate. And maybe we can also make it more accurate which of the things are requirements versus which of the things are just best practices and really controlled by your bylaws. So maybe double check what your bylaws say and see if this aligns.
Great, thank you, David. Does anyone have questions at the moment?
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and as you can see, that David does have his email is on the document. So people, please do feel free to send suggestions or questions or things that you find unclear. That's always helpful to be able to work those out. And this is the third page that David was referring to, which kind of summarizes much of the stuff that was in the last set of slides as well, but it's all kind of here on one page in sort of a handout form. I do have to say that the VSB Finance thought this was the bee's knees. They really liked, I think, the attempt to do it as well. That you were doing it as much as the final product. But they looked over it and said, yeah, no, it looks good to us. So the only thought I had, oh, when you're talking about the two accounts under here in terms of what's in the VSB account, in effect, I mean, it's nothing PACs need to actually do. That sort of is how it works though, because the donations come in through the donations module of School Cash Online, and the fundraising stuff comes in through the regular where you pay your fees module. So when you set up a fundraising, something to do fundraising with the school admin, it will be a separate box kind of within the system that then gets downloaded, you know, by check or EFT to the PAC from the VSB once the event is done. So those monies don't get kind of mushed together because they're in separate modes. So thank you. I'll stop that share. And I'm going to suggest it's, wow, we've got to about 10 after 8. People like to take like a 4 or 5 minute break and just kind of stretch out a bit. We'll come back. And welcome back, everyone. So I'm just going to go back to screen sharing for the last few slides of the presentation, and then we can open it up to general discussion of anything that's not been covered by them. So go slideshow. Yeah, great. So just, this is a little sort of section on some general idea about best practices for Treasury, right? So, and this one is really more applies to, you know, executive business as a whole, right? To take, you know, to follow your bylaws, to know what your bylaws are, and to follow them in terms of your process for making and recording decisions. So, voting and minuting any budgetary or financial change or decision, voting and minuting the addition of or removal of signing officers. That can kind of stretch out sometimes depending on how what your bank's or your credit union's process is in terms of if they need to get everyone together for one meeting, or things can be done and sort of sent out to people to sign them and send them back. So it's one of the nice treasurer transition pieces is to keep a little file with all of the information, the process that your financial institution has about signing authority, so that people can. Gosh, I don't know how often I've done a signing authority for you know, an organization I've been involved in, and thought we'd been completely prepared and gone to the bank and said, oh, but there's this piece you need to do now too. So it's good to keep up to date with that stuff, just so it can happen sort of fairly seamlessly as possible. So really what you're looking at always is, you know, when you're handling money that, you know, parents have entrusted you with, that you keep good records and that you're really transparent about how the money is being, decisions are being made, and then how the money is being spent. So monthly financial statements at PAC meetings, and then publish them as part of the meeting minutes, so that it's always kind of a public record as to what you're doing with the money. It's good as well to have a calendar of tasks. You know, when's the gaming grant application due? When do you need to make the report? What are the you know, events happening at the school that PAC traditionally has some involvement in, and you know, are there PAC events that are, you know, kind of annual things that you need to kind of plan around? And then I would say, you know, almost as soon as you start, good to start looking for parents who might be interested in serving when your term is finished. And it's great if you can sort of time your exit from the role of treasurer at a time when you're still around the school for another year or so, so that you can be there as a past treasurer kind of resource for the new people coming in. And, you know, when in doubt, you know, ask for help. One of the things that DPAC can do is you know, if you're struggling with something, you know, we don't know the answer to it, we can often help you find someone who does know the answer. So just thinking through, like, oh yeah, there was a PAC that dealt with this thing last year. Let's see if we can talk to them about how they worked it out, kind of thing. So, you know, sort of care and feeding of your treasurer, right? Because that's a job that's got a lot of responsibility tied to it. So, you know, PAC members can help their treasurer in a lot of ways. One, by, you know, ensuring your oh, I think I jumped a slide. All right. How do I go back? see. All right. Okay. Well, I think we can remember what was on that slide. Just to note that you know, accounting experience is, you know, helpful, but not absolutely necessary for people to take on the treasurer's role. It's not as nearly as complicated as running a business or running a full not-for-profit. And then just to say, I would say some of the most complicated stuff that's come to DPAC's attention that PACs have asked for help with were something that was kind of alluded to before, where a PAC inherits stuff from a past PAC that maybe was, you know, there was a complete changeover of executive people and a completely new group of people coming in, where there was some question about how something was handled and it doesn't seem to add up, and trying to get to the bottom of you know, sorting out a financial irregularity of some kind is really, really challenging under those circumstances, and often not possible, right? So it's really good practice for everybody to, you know, if you see something presented about PAC financials that you don't understand, that as soon as you realize you don't understand, that you ask questions about it and try and get clarity about it, because that will really go a long way towards preventing sort of situations from becoming kind of long running and more entangled and less easy to sort out, right? School administrators are the folks who can give you support and information and access to facilities. So keeping a good, strong, well-maintained relationship with school administrators is really crucial for success. Sometimes it doesn't happen. You get PACs and principals who are kind of find it really hard to work well together, but whatever you can do to keep that a good working relationship is super important and makes for a lot less of a stressful time. Again, you know, when in doubt, you know, do ask for help, and DPAC can be a source of help on some of that stuff for sure. There we go. Thank you. That's the piece that I jumped over. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything critical in there that we missed. Co-treasurers, we talked about that a bit. You know, try and use a low-cost community-minded bank. I mean, we've had pretty good experience with Van City. I hear some other credit unions are not so easy to work with in some ways. Yeah, I would periodically revisiting the importance of PAC assigns to fundraising is often a good sort of check. And also the amount of funds that seem reasonable to carry over to handle expenses early in the next year. I remember a question that came up last year was some PACs were, you know, had some folks on there who were really looking to accumulate lots of funds and then invest them and then make, you know, sort of use the interest to pay for stuff, and that gets into, you know, that's a much more complicated structure, and I think also, right, kind of beyond the capacity of a lot of school communities to really generate enough money that way to fund stuff off the interest. So I know the PACs I've been in have generally taken the position that the money we raise this year, we need to spend this year, because people are giving it to us this year to support the experience of, you know, support enhancing the experience of their children this year. So at the same time, you know, you're going to start the year with some fundraising, and maybe if you do, you'll have a little while before money comes in. So you know, a good discussion always about how much you want to carry over, keep over as a buffer for the next year is a good one to be having in sort of your public meetings. Yeah, so you know, unless of course, I guess the last point there, if you are fundraising for a large expense over many years, such as playground improvement or technology upgrades, you might want to set some funds in some kind of low risk investments, such as term deposits, until you know they're needed. If it's going to be like 2 years from now, we're going to replace the playground, then sure, if you're doing some fundraising specifically for that, to have it earning a little bit of interest over that time, you know, it sounds like actually a good practice. That we talked about. There we go. So a couple of other pieces. David alluded to this a bit as well. You do PACs do have the option if they want to avoid the whole having the VSB issue their tax receipts and then dealing with that whole system, you can take on a lot more work and register the PAC as a registered charity in its own right. So that requires, once you get through the whole registration process, it also requires annual filing of the end of year report with the BC Registrar of Companies, and also a registered charity information return with the Canada Revenue Agency within 6 months of the end of your fiscal year. If you don't send that in, they deregister you, and it's quite a big deal. So the charity, so if a PAC is registered as a society, it's no longer entirely governed by the School Act. All of the Societies Act pieces come into play there. So there's a lot of stuff in there about boards of directors and specific requirements to meet that. It's not onerous enough that PACs don't do. There are 2 PACs in Vancouver that I know of, the Tyee Elementary PAC and the Van Horn Elementary PAC, that are registered charitable societies. So if that's something your PAC wants to consider, there's a couple of local groups you could talk to about what their experience has been and how that's worked for them. Then the other piece is just, your own record keeping. If you use any kind of an online repository, make sure that's attached to a permanent PAC email address, not a personal email. So some PACs will have a general PAC email address that all that stuff is attached to. Others will have like a chair at, treasurer at. So if there's a treasurer at, then you keep everything attached to that in a drive. And then that migrates with that address to the next person taking on the role, and just makes the transition that much simpler, especially if you're around to explain all the weird things that you did with it. Another few miscellaneous points. PACs are eligible for PST rebates, but not for GST rebates. So if you've asked for, dear me, sorry, I keep jumping ahead here. If you've asked for the VSB to spend some money on something, for the PAC from the PAC VSB PAC account, and there's GST attached to that, then the VSB gets a GST credit on that, but they will pass that on to the PAC in terms of what money the actual record has spent out of the account. The GST credit will be included in that, so you'll see a number coming back from the VSB that says is less money than was on the invoice. That's because they have credited you with the amount that would have been theirs as the GST, right? So as a charitable organization, the VSB can claim that credit, but PACs can't. So there is a refund form that you can also fill out for PAC GST and PST for anything out of the VSB account, and there is a guide and a list to that form and a guide to it are on the DPAC website on the PAC resources page. We had it last year again. This was a kind of a dueling sets of requirements kind of question, where we had a PAC come to us who had had a playground project that they were wanting to use their gaming funds for. So the way typically those work is, if a PAC is funding part of a playground project, the VSB needs all the money in hand, including the money from the PAC, before the work starts, and then they disperse the money out to the contractors as the work is done. However, gaming funds can only be transferred to the district as reimbursement for purchases that have already been made. So we had a PAC that was in this situation where gaming is saying, you can't give the district the funds until they spent the money, and the district saying, we can't spend the money until you give it to us. So what was worked out basically was the PAC passed a motion earmarking the gaming funds portion for the project and asking the VSB basically accept that as an IOU, saying, yes, we have the money, we're not spending it on anything else, it's set aside for that, and as soon as you need it, you know, as soon as you need to pay the contractor, then we can transfer it to you, basically. So so the VSB basically looked at that and said, yeah, that's an acceptable arrangement. We can live with that. So if that ever comes up in a context you're working with, again, you know, talk to VSB Finance and say, here are the restrictions on the gaming funds. Can we basically, you know, make a motion that would satisfy you that we've sequestered the funds and have them, and then you know, when you've got the invoice and need to pay it, then we can transfer it, and apparently that worked just fine. So when you're dealing with kind of multiple agencies and funding sources, though, this is the kinds of impasses that sometimes can arise as a consequence of, you know, unintended consequence of the how everybody's different systems work. Here we are, last one here. Yeah, the EFTs, we talked about that a bit as well already. And then the other thing about the discussion around, you know, the sort of discussion at the PAC general meeting level about how you're spending your money. I know some schools have kind of loose sets of criteria they use to try to figure out if they get a bunch of requests from teachers, but they can't fund all of them, how do they decide which ones to fund? So the kinds of things that people consider are like, how many students would benefit, how long will the items last, are there other sources of funding available that school admin knows about? You know, are we trying to get roughly equal funding across divisions? So do we space out the money that way? So that's just something to think about if your PAC is having those discussions, that these are other ideas that PACs have used to help them, you know, make those decisions when they don't have enough money that they fund, that they're funding to cover all the requests that have come in. Because often, you know, when you're asking your teachers to put together their request lists, the PACs don't know at that point how much money they're going to have either, because maybe they've started a fundraising campaign at the beginning of the year. So that's really it for the formal presentation. Just to say, there is a resources page on the last part of the slide deck, which again you can access on the DPAC website, that's the address there, just vancouverdpac.org, and then you go to the PAC resources page. David's handout, PAC money rules, with the date on it, is on there as well. BCC PAC's leadership manual is linked into there as well. Then that's there's a chapter on financial management that is good. The other thing is, if folks aren't involved in the VSB PAC to PAC Slack group, please do maybe send me a request, and I can. Our vice chair Kayanta Martins is administering that group at the moment. That's quite a good resource for PACs to share information, experiences, brainstorm. It's divided up into a number of different channels based on sort of topics. So if you're a new PAC treasurer looking with a question about how do I do this, that's a good place to go throw that question in the treasurer channel, and you'll have generally a number of folks will respond and say, oh, here's what we tried, or don't do this, we did it, it was a disaster, or have you thought of this kind of thing. So that's a good resource. So that's the end of the slides. I'm going to stop sharing now, and invite any questions. Sky, if you or is there a bit of a list that you've got, or
I think we've been covering them as we're going. I mean, obviously, if people have anything, but I think we've been David and I have been sort of sorting through that, and I think there's been some really good conversation. Yeah, I think the only one thing that we still haven't now talked about is about how do we sort, multiple years. Like if you've got this thing looking at you with all these different years, not really labeled receipts, how do you deal with that situation? Sort of moving forward as a new treasurer. I think that was sort of what one of the questions was.
That is a tough one, and I'm actually gonna. It's a couple of quick comments. I'm happy to throw that open to the group for people if anyone's had to sort their way through that kind of a thing, and what was helpful and what wasn't. One of the first things I'd probably do is get in touch with those people if they're still contactable, and say, we're trying to sort out some confusion from previous years. It looks like this was stuff that you were involved in can you help, right? And see what they have to say, right?
Yeah, I will just say the personal thing that happened from ours. So about 5 years ago, we had exactly the same situation. We had like a garbage bag full of receipts, and she seriously had to go through, look at all the dates, put the dates all into little piles, and then try and find if there was actual kind of things, what they could be into a category for, office supplies or whatever it was. She could put those into those, but other things just had to go under miscellaneous, and then the PAC just had to basically kind of pass those through. But those were, it was sort of an internal thing to get them caught up, but it was a big challenge.
We had to go through multiple years of gaming stuff. And then also COVID happened. So we were also like not in a good place. And so we had to, and also we had changes of principals. So our admin wasn't the same as it was before. So yeah, it really was, we had to work our networks, because the people on the PAC didn't have the numbers or the contact information for the people who had been before. So we had to do a friend of a friend kind of thing to get that particular information. And then once we got that information, we immediately put it on our drive and let everybody have access to it so that there was transparency from their point on. But it was really difficult. I think the other part that helped us was the gaming grant people. We just called them and we were like, how detailed does this really need to be? And they were very honest about that it kind of doesn't. But we have to have good intentions about it. And so we told them our situation, and they were really great with us and worked with us to be able to get back in to where we are now, which is kind of healthy.
Oh, thanks, Lauren. That's good to hear. I mean, it is. I mean, it's not an easy task. I mean, if you get that sort of history landing on you, it's not quick work to deal with it, for sure. So it sounds great that between the community and gaming and other resources, they were able to sort that out.
Michael has his hand raised, and I'm going to leave, but anyhow, I also just put a little thing in the chat, and David is wanting, or Michael wants to speak, but I just wanted to maybe mention, I think probably you will as well, Ellen, that everybody is welcome at all of our meetings. And so there's general meetings and there's executive meetings. You can't vote at the executive meetings, and if you're not a DPAC rep or an alternate chair to stand in for the DPAC rep, you can't vote at the generals, but everyone is welcome to contribute to conversation. So it was nice to see other people here. And thanks a lot, Alan. Great job.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, David. And nice meeting you all.
Good night. Michael, thanks. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so just following up on the previous point, I wonder if, rather than take our time to, sort through the previous years, if it's okay if we just have this information, keep it, and I'm talking about the bag of receipts from previous years, keep it somewhere safe and then reference it should we need to, or should we get audited in the future. Obviously, everyone here, we're all volunteers, and it seems like a bit of a waste of valuable volunteer time to sift through previous years of stuff if it's not going to be referenced. So do people think it's acceptable for us to just essentially hold it for the time being, and then reference it or dig deep if we need to in the future?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I from Lauren's comment that gaming seemed quite understanding about a reasonable level of accountability for stuff that particular bunch of people wasn't actually accountable for is heartening for sure. It'd be worth a discussion, sure, with your PAC, and also it's like, well, why do you need the information? If it's a matter of gaming telling you we haven't had a report for 3 years and we need to be updated, or we're not giving you any money, then you do have to do enough to satisfy gaming that you've got now sort of a good kind of control mechanisms about what's going on, good oversight for what's going on, right? So if it seems like, okay, we're clear where we are now, and here's how we're going to do things going forward, that's a big part of the job there, right? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say you need to be able to reconcile every penny. I mean, unless they're, if there are people on the PAC who say, well, I'm not really comfortable unless we do that, and I'll take it on, then that's good too, right? I mean, it's better to have it completely clear, but as clear as you can get, and then making sure that the people you need to be clear to are happy with that being as clear as they're happy with, then you'll be okay, I think.
Okay. And it's not to throw shade at our predecessors in any way. It's just that they did it a certain way, and that's how it worked for them for years. And it's great. But now that we are in the midst of this, generational change, essentially, we're trying to essentially come up with a system that will work and will be able to, a bit of a smoother transition later on. And if that's, using a bookkeeping software or something like that, that's something we're considering. But we don't want to have to do the legacy work of doing the previous years. We would just hopefully like to start in September of 2022 and continue on in that direction. So that's roughly the idea that we're thinking, but just wanted to make sure that, generally that seemed okay.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I mean, unless there's like, $10,000 missing or something, that if you're not dealing with anything that's like alarming like that, then if it's just a matter of the two systems don't match up, then start from what your hands are on, starting with that and going forward. Sounds reasonable.
Okay.
Alec,
thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just wondering around the gaming reports. I kind of learned as I went through the first report for this for last year, and essentially the details came from the school accountant. She provided all the transactions with the different teachers and different funded projects or whatnot. So it was just, like I said, a written description. Is there ever, or do they ever require like receipts and invoices? Because that seems like another level of reporting that would take a lot of effort, and I couldn't see anywhere in the report that was asking for that. But what's your experience with that?
Well, the report just asks you to list the transactions, like who signed off on them, what they're for. But the 5-year requirement that you keep all your records is the gaming requirement in case they asked you to audit, right? So but if for example a lot of the records, the information that came to you came from the school office, then the school office would have that information if there was ever an audit. So I don't think you would need to say to them, can we get all the receipts, right? Okay. Although for gaming, though, typically gaming, it would be more likely to be the PAC that would actually write the things from the gaming account, or if you were transferring money from the gaming account to the school to spend on stuff that you asked for, then you would have a record of that, and then of what the school reported back to you. So that would probably be enough, I would think.
Well, maybe I can walk through the way Tupper does it, and I don't know if that's unique or not. Rather than doing each like a payment or a check to each funding request as they spend the money and invoice for it, the school fronts all the spending for the year for all those teachers, and then they keep a record of each one as they come in, and then they give us a report at the end of the year, and then a request for the full total amount for that year. So we do it's very simple in my mind. One transaction for us, we don't have to constantly make payments for each request because it's like dozens. But we do get a report, and it's all like consolidated through the school accountant. So we don't have any of the receipts or anything like that. Like you say, I'm assuming the school might keep the receipts, those kind of records. I don't know, like, should we be asking for records of that?
Yeah,
Year?
yeah, I wouldn't think so, because you know, thank you for laying that out that completely, because it's clear that you're not fronting money to the school. You know, they're spending the money and then asking you to pay them back out of gaming, basically, to cover that, which is fine. That's and then yes, I mean, the VSB has fairly tight financial practices as far as I can tell, and so they would be able to back up all of those in case of an audit. So I don't think you as the PAC need to ask them for all those receipts. Yeah, no, that seems like, you know, the auditors would know where to find them. So, you know, yeah. Thanks. Elise.
Well, I just had a comment to make that you know, our predecessors, like we paid the school for some of the extracurricular supplies that teachers incurred, and had a check of like a round number of $3,000. And the gaming grant people came back to me with a letter saying, this is not acceptable. Like, you know, there should be a receipt attached to every check that is sent, and how we're doing it isn't the proper way to do it. Like, there's just no accountability from, well, I think maybe our accountant, I mean, we didn't get a report back from our school about the nitty gritty, how the money was spent. And so that was a big red flag to gaming. And so this year I kept every single receipt from every single teacher to make sure that everything was accounted for. But they did tell me that, you know, you should have a receipt for every check that you write. So now I do. And what we did before, it was just that our previous PAC has done it years and years and years, and I was just following what they did. But this year last year they said that's not acceptable, and there's certain things that they're not accepting anymore either. Like, we used to pay for babysitting when we're holding PAC meetings. That's not acceptable either. Yeah, so, and then we had to be more like descriptive in how I describe, you know, artists in residence. So we did some subsidy for their art supplies. And if it's going in, it has to be very clear about like how the money is used. If it's in any way benefiting parents, then gaming cannot be used. So that's why babysitting didn't qualify anymore, because I was trying to say that it's giving students experience in leadership in babysitting. It's giving them babysitting experience, but that's it didn't fly. So it's it obviously benefits you parents, so it doesn't qualify. Yeah, so if we're holding any parent social, it doesn't qualify. So yeah, but that's what gaming told me. Keep a receipt for every expense that every check you write. unless you're, I mean, in our situation, I didn't get any receipts from our accountant, from our administrator, so I didn't have a report from our administrator. So I you know, so we have to do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Elise. I mean, it sounds like it is a different situation than the Tupper one, in that they do get basically one invoice from the school for all of the expenses they've made. So okay. that would count as opposed to, you know, writing a check to the school and then for stuff that they're going to spend over the course of the year, right? So yeah. So what you've done in terms of, you know, collecting individual receipts, or collecting receipts from teachers and then reimbursing them, it's a lot of work, but it does kind of fulfill that requirement from gaming for sure. I'm glad to hear that it's sort of gone better right since then. And the babysitting, I actually had the same conversation with gaming a little earlier this year, because DPAC doesn't have 3 years to spend its grant. We have to spend it within a year, and we were a little bit shy, and I thought, oh, if we could pay for babysitting for this thing we're doing, that would get us over the hump. And they said, nope, you can't do that. got to find something else. So yeah, same rationale too. It was even though DPAC is like, it's like, well, we really do more work for parents rather than for students, right? And so, parent education and stuff like that is fine. Like we can bring in a speaker and pay for that out of gaming money that you couldn't do as a PAC, but they didn't buy that babysitting was really not an administrative expense. So anyway, we didn't fight about it. We just said, okay, well, we found something else that we need to spend the money on that qualified. So. Well, are there other questions or thoughts that folks have they'd like to bring up, or comments about does anything seem a bit fuzzy that we could revisit? Or
Alan, I thought perhaps we could share the experience that we had at KITS with knowing about ongoing charges that don't come up very often, like the website.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Where it was paying for our domain comes up every 3 years, but nobody remembered. Nobody current last year remembered that this was going to happen. So it was a bit of a surprise when our website went down because we hadn't paid, because we didn't know it was due, because the treasurer had in fact passed away, and that was on her personal credit card. So it took a lot of figuring out. So some of those long-term recurring expenses just to be recorded somewhere in a note so that the future people remember.
Yeah, good point. I'd forgotten about that experience. It was partly because I kind of heard about it afterwards, but
yeah, for me too, it was afterwards.
Yeah. So yeah, for sure, it speaks to both an information repository attached to the PAC rather than to a person, and a calendar that has things like that when this comes due for renewal, on it, that moves along for people too. Is one of those things that's when you're thick of the job, sometimes it's hard to think about that piece of it, but it's to have that kind of resource is really helpful. Yeah, I know we have 3 or 4 things that renew annually for DPAC. We don't have anything on a longer cycle than that, which gets the risk of it getting dropped somehow is much higher when it's like we've had 2 completely different executives between then and now, and nobody really checked that. So yeah, so one thing that it could be useful for a treasurer to do as well is if you're the one handling bills that come in, often on bills for those kinds of services, there'll be something on there about the date of the service, and it's just to sort of notice that and flag it for the rest of the executive, say we've got to make sure we budget for that this next year or whatever. Right? So it's makes life easier for the next people for sure. Any other thoughts on easing transitions for
we actually have a couple of things that doesn't occur annually, but every 2 years. And what we do is on the budget line every year, all those will be shown up, but then the year it will just say 0, but then note that it's for next year. So we know it's coming, but it's just not applicable for this year. But all those recurring will always be on the budget. It's just whether there'll be an amount or a 0 amount.
Oh, cool. So you keep it like as a placeholder in the budget.
Yeah, and
so
then we
that,
just make a note, say, every how many years.
Thank you. Well, we're pretty close to 9, and and so if folks are feeling done, that's great. We will put the recording up on the website pretty quickly, I think, this year, seeing as I took so long last year. So the slide deck is there already, as is the infographic on about how PAC accounts work. So thank you everybody for coming out and spending the time. Hope it was useful information for folks. And even if you have thoughts afterwards occur to you, please feel free to send me an email. I'm at treasurer@vancouverdpac.org, and happy to respond to questions and or feedback. Would be great. So, thanks everyone.